It started with the rain, not the kind that drenches you, but the kind that whispers secrets. Secrets only she could hear. A girl, impossibly tall in silhouette, her hair trailing behind her in waves that seemed to move with a life of their own. Each raindrop that landed on her strands shimmered, casting tiny glimmers that danced like fireflies along the darkened street. She walked slowly, almost hesitantly, as if each step required a quiet conversation with the world around her, murmuring secrets meant only for her. She lifted her hand instinctively, letting a single droplet fall onto her palm. It lingered there, glowing faintly, a tiny orb of liquid light, before sinking into the ground with a soft splash that echoed longer than natural laws would allow. The air around her seemed to pulse gently in response, and for a brief moment, the world itself seemed to hold its breath. As she continued walking, her hair began to shift and grow. Strands curled and twisted, reaching toward the damp earth and rising back into the misty sky. The hair stretched impossibly long, coiling like delicate golden ropes, forming shapes that resembled arches, bridges, and miniature towers. It was as if the rain had found a willing partner in her, whispering directions into each strand. Tiny glowing creatures appeared, drawn to the magic moths with translucent wings, small birds with feathers like shards of light, perching delicately on the curves of her growing hair. The girl did not flinch. She smiled softly, a gesture so quiet and intimate that it seemed to belong only to the rain, only to the city at this moment. The rain grew heavier, and yet it carried no chill. Instead, it seemed to flow around her, parting like water around a stone, guiding her path. Each step she took left small ripples in the puddles beneath her, reflections of the glowing strands bending reality itself. A faint doorway began to form within the hair that swirled around her, a tiny, glowing portal, delicate and inviting, suspended in midi. It flickered as if hesitant to exist, yet it remained, pulsing with soft golden light. The girl reached toward it instinctively, her fingers brushing against the ethereal strands, feeling warmth and the faint hum of possibility. Around her, the city moved unaware. People hurried past in umbrellas, their faces obscured, immersed in their routines, blind to the impossible spectacle unfolding above them. Neon signs flickered, reflecting in the wet asphalt like mirrored constellations, and the faint glow from her hair cast long, surreal shadows over walls and curbs. She tilted her head, listening. The rain no longer sounded like droplets striking surfaces. It became a voice, soft, melodic, almost sentient. It spoke in patterns she understood but could not explain, whispering words that were not words, questions she had always longed to hear, and directions she did not yet know how to follow. A gust of wind stirred, and her hair lifted higher, coiling into intricate spirals that reached toward the clouds above. She closed her eyes for a moment, letting the strands envelope her, and for an instant, she felt weightless, as though she were floating between the city and the sky. The glowing doorway within her hair pulsed brighter, inviting her, promising something beyond comprehension. The creatures perched along her hair chirped and hummed in response, a chorus of tiny lights and movement that mirrored the rhythm of the rain. She took a careful step forward, the puddles beneath her reflecting the impossible scene in fractured, sparkling shards, each one a tiny window into a world only she could see. Her heart quickened, not in fear, but in recognition of something long forgotten. The rain whispered louder, guiding her closer to the glowing hair doorway. She reached out with both hands now, fingers grazing the edge of the portal. Warmth spread through her arms, and the city around her began to blur at the edges, as if reality itself were bending to accommodate her magic. She could hear it now, a faint, melodic voice in the rain calling her name, coaxing her forward, urging her to step through the impossible. She inhaled, and the city exhaled with her. The wind tugged gently at her hair, curling strands around her like protective tendrils. Tiny motes of glowing light danced in the air, drawn to her aura, following her movement, celebrating her courage. One step, then another, until she was standing directly before the hair doorway. Her reflection shimmered in the puddles beneath her, multiplied across the rippling water, each image showing a slightly different version of herself, all curious, all hesitant, all ready. She was not like other girls. Where others saw hair, she saw a world waiting to grow, a world she could shape and hide within. Her fingers traced the strands like a sculptor shaping clay, and as she moved them, tiny threads of glowing light began to twist and curl, forming a miniature archway, a delicate bridge, and a little window that gleamed as if it held a secret inside. The hair around her seemed to pulse with life, stretching and bending in response to her touch, every strand vibrating with quiet energy. She leaned closer to inspect her work, her eyes shimmering with a mixture of wonder and loneliness, reflecting both the miniature creation and the city lights outside the window. The rain tapped softly against the glass, but when it touched her hair, it sparked. Droplets slid down, leaving tiny glowing trails that merged into her miniature structures. The light from the glowing threads grew stronger with each touch, and the tiny house seemed to expand as if it had a heartbeat. She smiled faintly, a private smile reserved for the world she alone could enter, a place that existed beyond logic and time. Shadows shifted around her room as the walls seemed to stretch, bending to accommodate the growing intricacies of her hair house. Each strand became a corridor, a staircase, a tiny balcony where the light glimmered like captured stars. Her hands moved with deliberate care, coaxing tiny bridges to connect with windows, twisting threads into arches and towers that defied ordinary physics. Somewhere in the distance, a soft sound of wind chimes echoed, though the windows were closed. It was as if the city itself had paused, watching her creation unfold. Tiny glowing creatures, no larger than fireflies, began to emerge from the hair, hovering around her miniature world, perching on strands and windowsills, illuminating corners she hadn't yet touched. She tilted her head, studying the tiny inhabitants, feeling a surge of connection. Though she was alone in the room, the tiny creatures made her feel less lonely, their soft hums blending with the rhythm of the rain outside. The hair around her swayed gently as if alive, curling upward to form towers and spirals that stretched higher than the ceiling. With a tentative hand, she reached toward a tiny glowing door that had appeared on a balcony. Her fingers brushed the light, and in response, the doorway shimmered, revealing a faint glimpse of a larger world beyond a world made of luminous threads, delicate pathways, and glowing skies, impossible yet mesmerizing. She gasped softly, realizing that the house in her hair was no longer just a sanctuary. It had become a doorway to something she could not yet name, a world that existed in the space between imagination and reality. Her heart raced as she stepped closer, fingers brushing the glowing threads that formed a bridge leading to the doorway. Each strand felt warm to the touch, vibrating with quiet energy, guiding her forward. The glowing creatures fluttered around her, leaving trails of light that highlighted the paths she could take. She felt as if the rain outside had seeped into her very being, giving life to her creation and urging her onward. Shadows from the city outside danced across the walls, reflecting in the glowing threads, making it seem as though the miniature world within her hair mirrored the world outside, yet shimmered with magic that no one else could perceive. She paused, breathing in the faint scent of ozone and rain that had mingled with the glow of her hair house. Her eyes widened as more details emerged without her conscious effort. Tiny windows framed with luminous vines, delicate staircases curling around towers, balconies where small glowing birds perched, and little bridges connecting different sections, each one alive with soft energy. It was as if her hair had learned to build itself, responding to her intent and her deepest desires. She ran her fingers over a thread that coiled into a tower, and instantly, it extended higher, spiraling elegantly toward the ceiling, its glow reflecting in her wide, awestruck eyes. The rain outside intensified slightly, tapping against the windows in a rhythmic pattern that seemed almost like a heartbeat. Every droplet that touched her hair sparked a small wave of light that traveled along the strands, expanding her miniature world further, creating hidden rooms and secret passages she had never imagined. She knelt down, peering into a tiny glowing window, and saw a reflection of herself inside, smaller yet radiant, exploring the corridors and balconies she had built. A sense of calm washed over her, yet it was tinged with a thrill. She knew that whatever existed within this miniature hair world was just the beginning, that the possibilities were infinite, limited only by her imagination and the whispering rain outside. Her hands moved faster now, coaxing bridges to link towers, opening tiny doors that revealed glowing interiors, and shaping arches that caught the soft light of her miniature lanterns. The room around her seemed to hum with quiet energy as the hair stretched farther, curling along walls, wrapping around furniture, even reaching the ceiling in glowing spirals. Tiny sparks of light drifted upward, coalescing into soft glowing orbs that floated around her, illuminating her face and highlighting the wonder and loneliness in her expression. She felt a deep, inexplicable joy, the kind that comes from building a world that is entirely yours, from shaping reality with nothing but intent and a touch of magic. As the rain continued to whisper against the window, her hair house pulsed with life, glowing threads stretching, curling, and connecting in ways she hadn't consciously directed. Tiny glowing creatures moved through corridors and across bridges, exploring the nooks and corners, leaving trails of luminescence in their wake. She reached toward a small balcony, and when her fingers brushed the glowing railing, the entire structure shimmered, revealing a faint portal-like doorway suspended mid-air, glowing softly, inviting her to step forward. She realized with a thrill that this was no longer just a sanctuary. It was a bridge to something beyond, a magical world waiting for her to explore, born from the hair she had always carried and the rain that had always whispered. Her heartbeat quickened as she gazed at the glowing doorway, knowing that stepping through would take her somewhere entirely unknown. The hair around her swayed as if urging her forward, the tiny creatures circling in a pattern that mirrored her anticipation. She inhaled slowly, taking in the warmth of the glow, the soft hum of energy in the air, and the rhythmic whisper of the rain outside. The world beyond her hair house awaited, delicate, shimmering, and impossibly alive, and she felt the pull of curiosity stronger than anything she had ever known. With a careful, deliberate step, she moved closer to the glowing doorway. Her fingers reached out, brushing the strands of hair that formed a bridge to the portal. Light spread through the strands like liquid gold, illuminating every detail of the miniature structures she had built, reflecting in her wide, sparkling eyes. A soft, melodic hum filled the room as the hair pulsed gently, alive with magic. She knew that once she stepped through, the world she had always imagined would no longer be confined to her hair. It would become real, vast, and waiting. She hesitated only for a heartbeat, then stepped forward, crossing the threshold into the glowing doorway, leaving the room behind as the rain continued to whisper secrets only she could hear. And when the rain touched her hair, it listened. Every droplet a messenger, every strand a branch of possibility. She began to build her sanctuary. The hair responded instantly, curling and twisting, stretching into delicate spirals and arches that defied gravity. It formed walls and balconies, bridges and windows, each strand glowing softly as if imbued with life. Tiny birds, radiant and ethereal, perched along the curving structures, their feathers catching the faint light, flickering like miniature lanterns. The room itself seemed to expand, walls breathing outward to accommodate the growing wonder, ceilings stretching into invisible heights where strands intertwined like glowing vines in a cathedral of hair. She ran her fingers along a delicate balcony, and the strands beneath her touch trembled and stretched farther, creating a tiny winding staircase that led to a glowing tower. Her eyes reflected the soft luminescence, sparkling with a mixture of awe and quiet loneliness. She felt as if she were both creator and spectator, shaping a world that existed somewhere between dream and reality. Raindrops continued to fall, but here, within the strands, they became more than water, each one a spark of possibility, sending pulses of light along the hair's length, illuminating hidden rooms, secret corridors, and tiny glowing nooks. The birds chirped in delicate harmonies, almost singing with the rhythm of the rain. One small creature hopped toward her, brushing against her hand, leaving a trail of faint glittering light in its wake. She smiled, realizing that her sanctuary was no longer just a creation. It was alive, breathing with its own subtle heartbeat. As she moved through the strands, touching windows and doors, they shifted to meet her hand, rearranging themselves, opening passageways where none had been before. Tiny glowing lanterns floated upward, orbiting her, casting soft light on every intricate detail of the miniature treehouse she now inhabited. The air smelled faintly of rain and ozone, mingling with the soft warmth of glowing threads. She leaned over a bridge woven from her hair, watching tiny glowing reflections ripple like liquid stars in the puddles below. Each strand she touched seemed to respond to her mood, bending gently or stretching gracefully, forming towers or delicate lattice windows. A faint whisper, like the voice of the rain itself, tickled her ears, carrying fragments of secrets she could almost understand. She felt the pulse of the sanctuary in tandem with her heartbeat, as though it had learned to anticipate her thoughts, her movements, and even her dreams. Time seemed to stretch. Minutes became moments, and moments stretched into infinity as she wandered through the glowing corridors she had built. Tiny glowing doors opened to reveal impossible vistas. Miniature gardens suspended in air, glowing vines curling along the walls, and delicate bridges arching over gaps that led into radiant light. Birds fluttered from one strand to another, their wings scattering soft motes of light across the strands, making the hair house shimmer like a floating constellation. She traced a glowing balcony with her fingers, and a spiral staircase appeared, curling upward into the ceiling where the strands formed a delicate spire that pulsed with gentle light. Her heart raced as she realized the sanctuary had no boundaries. Every movement, every thought, seemed to influence the shape of the glowing structure. She twirled a strand in her fingers, and it stretched upward, forming a delicate tower with windows that glimmered like captured stars. Tiny glowing creatures explored the new spaces, investigating each corridor and balcony with curiosity, leaving trails of light in their wake. She paused, gazing at the miniature world she had conjured, and a feeling of quiet triumph mingled with the still-present loneliness. Though she was surrounded by glowing life, the room echoed with a serene solitude that seemed to belong only to her. Outside, the rain continued to fall, but inside her sanctuary, it was transformed. Each droplet that landed on her hair sparked a wave of light, traveling through the strands and illuminating hidden corners. A faint mist formed around the glowing towers, softening the edges and giving everything an ethereal, dreamlike quality. She leaned closer to a tiny balcony and touched one of the glowing windows. Instantly, the window opened to reveal a faint reflection of her face, smaller yet radiant, gazing back with awe. The strands of hair responded, curling into protective arches around the reflection, as though safeguarding this tiny, magical version of herself. A breeze stirred within the room, though no window had opened, and the strands of hair swayed like gentle trees in a forest. Tiny glowing birds took flight, their wings scattering sparkles that danced in the soft light. She felt a thrill of connection, as though the sanctuary understood her innermost thoughts, her deepest desires, and even her quiet fears. The glowing strands twisted into new shapes on their own towers, bridges, staircases, and tiny glowing doors appearing in places she had not consciously imagined. Each droplet of rain that landed on her hair became a spark of inspiration, sending ripples through the glowing threads, creating patterns and structures that seemed to emerge from the magic itself. She stepped carefully across a bridge formed from her hair, watching the soft glow of the strands ripple beneath her fingers. Tiny glowing creatures fluttered around, leaving arcs of light in the air. She looked out across the glowing treehouse, seeing towers stretch upward, delicate bridges span between them, and glowing windows flickering within a light. A faint whisper reached her ears, not words, but a rhythm, a melody in harmony with the sanctuary itself. She felt the pull of something beyond the strands, something waiting outside this glowing haven, yet intimately connected to the magic she had nurtured. Her heart quickened as she reached toward the largest glowing tower, brushing her hand against the strands that formed its walls. The hair pulsed beneath her touch, and a doorway appeared, suspended midair, glowing faintly. Through it, she glimpsed a vast world of shimmering lights and floating threads that stretched into the distance, impossible yet beckoning. She inhaled deeply, feeling the warmth of the glow, the gentle pulse of magic, and the whisper of the rain outside, all converging into a singular moment of awe. The sanctuary she had built within her hair was alive, radiant, and infinite, yet it was only the beginning. With a tentative step, she moved closer to the glowing doorway, feeling the strands of hair guide her forward. The tiny glowing creatures circled her in patterns of light, their wings scattering radiant dust that clung to the strands and shimmered like stars. The rain outside tapped against the windows, rhythmic and insistent, echoing like a heartbeat. She paused for a moment, feeling the thrill of discovery, the delicate balance of magic and solitude, and the anticipation of a world beyond this sanctuary that was waiting for her to step inside. Finally, she reached the glowing doorway, her hand brushing against its edge. The strands of hair surrounding it quivered, stretching and curling as though inviting her through. She took a deep breath, feeling the warmth, the light, the whispering rain, and the heartbeat of the sanctuary itself. Then, with a quiet exhale, she stepped forward, crossing the threshold into the unknown, leaving the room behind while the glowing strands of her hair pulsed gently, keeping her magical world alive and waiting for her return. Outside, the world continued as usual. Cars hummed down wet streets, umbrellas bobbed through puddles, and people hurried home, unaware of the extraordinary unfolding nearby. But inside, she was constructing a place where no one could follow, a place only the rain and she understood. Her hair swirled and stretched, threads of light weaving themselves into delicate bridges, towers, and spiraling staircases. Each strand pulsed softly, glowing like a living lantern, reflecting the rhythm of the rainfall outside. Tiny glowing birds fluttered along the arcs of her creation, their wings scattering light that bounced across the walls of the room, turning shadows into patterns of wonder. She reached a strand that coiled like a rope, and as her fingers brushed it, it extended upward, forming a graceful archway that seemed to disappear into the ceiling. Her eyes widened as new details appeared unbidden. Windows carved into glowing towers, balconies suspended in air, miniature glowing vines curling around staircases. Every movement she made sparked a response from the strands, and it became clear that this sanctuary was alive, thinking with her, anticipating her desires. The air vibrated faintly with energy, scented with ozone and faint hints of wet earth, as if the room itself exhaled with the pulse of creation. The rain outside tapped steadily against the windows, each droplet sending a shiver of light along her hair. Tiny luminous creatures emerged from the strands, floating through corridors she had not yet built, exploring rooms that twisted in impossible angles, their glowing trails tracing patterns in the air. She laughed softly, a sound that mingled with the whispers of the rain. Even alone, she felt companionship in the delicate beings she had summoned, the life of the sanctuary responding to her imagination. She ran her hands along a glowing balcony, and instantly a new staircase curled downward, connecting to a tiny courtyard filled with floating lanterns. Time became meaningless. Minutes stretched like hours as she wandered, shaping and reshaping the strands, experimenting with impossible geometries. A glowing window appeared beneath a spiraling tower, revealing a reflection of herself smaller, radiant, and exploring the corridors, peering curiously into every nook and cranny. She reached toward it, and the strands gently twisted to let her hand pass through, almost as if her reflection were real and waiting for interaction. The hair pulsed around her fingers, sending light rippling through arches and bridges, creating secret passageways and hidden chambers. She leaned over a balcony woven from luminous threads, watching tiny glowing reflections ripple like stars across miniature pools of water suspended mid-air. Each droplet of rain that fell on her hair sparked a new element, a glowing vine curling upward, a tiny door appearing where none had been, or a delicate bridge stretching between towers. She felt her sanctuary expand beyond conscious control, as if the magic itself had taken the reins, shaping a world that was greater than she could imagine. Her pulse quickened, a mixture of exhilaration and awe filling her chest as she realized that what she was building was alive in ways she could feel, in ways only the rain and she could understand. The creatures she had summoned fluttered around her, their glowing bodies tracing arcs in the air, leaving trails that settled into intricate patterns on bridges and staircases. She reached a strand that hung like a ribbon from the ceiling, curling it around her wrist, and the strand grew upward into a luminous tower that stretched impossibly high, the top lost in shimmering mist. A faint melody seemed to hum through the strands, soft and enchanting, resonating with her heartbeat, as if the sanctuary itself were singing in quiet harmony with the rain. She traced corridors with her fingers, feeling the glow beneath her touch, discovering tiny rooms tucked into the curves of bridges, each one filled with impossible details, miniature glowing trees, delicate floating lanterns, and glowing furniture that shimmered as if carved from liquid light. Each element seemed aware of her presence, adjusting and rearranging with gentle fluidity. She walked across a glowing bridge, feeling its delicate strands sway beneath her hands, a rhythm as steady and comforting as the falling rain. Outside, the world remained ordinary, unaware of the sanctuary unfolding within the strands of her hair. But here, time moved differently, bending to the will of her imagination. Tiny glowing creatures perched on balconies, investigating newly formed rooms, leaving trails of radiant dust that lingered in the air. She leaned close to one of the towers, peering into a window that had appeared unbidden. Inside, a miniature reflection of herself was gazing back, curious and alive, exploring corners she hadn't yet imagined. She smiled, realizing that her creation had a life of its own, responding to her touch and her thoughts with elegant, fluid grace. The strands of hair stretched farther, curling into new towers and bridges, forming arches that connected rooms and corridors in impossible configurations. She reached a glowing balcony and touched a tiny door suspended mid-air. The door pulsed in response, revealing a faint glimpse of a larger world beyond one made entirely of light, threads, and ethereal structures that shimmered with life. Her pulse quickened as she realized that her sanctuary was no longer confined to the room or even the hair itself. It had become a bridge to something beyond, a magical world she could explore, a world that awaited only her curiosity. She stepped carefully across a bridge of glowing threads, feeling the strands sway and hum beneath her fingers. Tiny creatures fluttered around her, scattering light and leaving trails in the air. The room expanded with every step, corridors stretching and twisting, balconies forming naturally from the flowing strands. Each droplet of rain that touched her hair added to the complexity, sparking new bridges, doors, and towers. She felt as though she had entered a living organism, a creation that breathed and pulsed, waiting for her to discover its endless possibilities. Her eyes shone with wonder as she approached a towering arch that had formed before her, the strands curling and spiraling upward into the misty ceiling. The glowing birds perched along the curves, their wings scattering light like delicate fireworks. She reached forward, feeling warmth radiate from the strands, and for the first time, she sensed that her sanctuary had a consciousness, guiding her, offering spaces to explore, inviting her to step further into the magic that was alive in every thread, every droplet, and every whispering echo of the rain. Finally, she reached a central balcony from which she could see the entirety of her creation. Towers of glowing strands, bridges twisting impossibly through the air, tiny glowing rooms, and miniature creatures exploring endlessly. She breathed deeply, feeling a quiet triumph and a pulse of joy. This sanctuary was hers, alive with magic, connected to the rain, and to her own heartbeat. She wasn't hiding because she feared the world. She was hiding because the world had forgotten how to dream. And she still remembered. Her fingers brushed a glowing mirror tucked delicately within the twisting corridors of her hair house. The reflection shimmered, showing a version of herself she had longed to see, smiling freely, unburdened by the weight of solitude, radiant and alive. The mirror pulsed faintly, as if acknowledging her touch, sending ripples of soft light across the strands of hair that formed her sanctuary. Tiny glowing birds perched along the edges, their wings scattering luminous specks that danced like fireflies along the glowing threads. As she leaned closer, the reflection smiled wider, reaching a hand toward hers. She mirrored it, and the glowing strands beneath her fingers responded, curling and stretching to meet the motion. The hair around her hummed softly, a gentle, living vibration, as if the sanctuary itself were aware of the connection forming between her present self and this brighter version reflected in the mirror. She gasped softly, a thrill running through her chest, realizing that this was no ordinary reflection. It was a promise, a glimpse of who she could be in a world untethered by fear or forgetfulness. Her fingers traced the edges of the mirror, and the strands of hair seemed to stretch and curl in response, forming arches, bridges, and spiraling staircases that led to new, unseen corners of the hair house. Tiny glowing lanterns appeared along the railings, casting soft light over delicate balconies and glowing corridors. She felt as if she were stepping into a living dream, one that pulsed with her heartbeat and responded to her every thought. The air was rich with the scent of rain and ozone, mingling with faint traces of sweet, ethereal flowers that seemed to bloom wherever the light touched. Raindrops tapped softly against the windows outside, each one sending a ripple of light along the strands, illuminating hidden rooms and secret passageways. She followed one glowing corridor to a tiny balcony where a glowing pond reflected countless miniature stars, shimmering in perfect harmony with the birds perched along the hair arches. She reached out, and as her fingers touched the surface, a soft vibration traveled through the water and into the strands around her. The reflection in the mirror flickered, now showing her walking through the glowing world, exploring towers and bridges that stretched impossibly into the air. Her heart raced as she realized the hair house was no longer merely a sanctuary. It had become a living extension of her imagination, a realm where the forgotten art of dreaming could flourish. Tiny glowing creatures, resembling miniature constellations, danced along staircases and railings, leaving trails of light that intertwined with the threads of hair. Each movement she made prompted a response. New towers spiraled upward, bridges arched elegantly across impossible gaps, and glowing doors appeared in places she hadn't even imagined. It was as if the sanctuary was alive, breathing with her joy and her memories, a place where creativity and magic converged. She moved toward a glowing archway that had appeared behind the mirror, trailing delicate vines of luminous hair that twisted into intricate patterns overhead. Stepping through, she found herself in a chamber filled with floating islands of light, each hovering above a sea of glowing mist. Tiny glowing bridges connected the islands, and delicate creatures flitted between them, leaving trails of sparkling light. She reached out to touch one of the islands, and it responded, shifting beneath her fingers, folding and curling into a new configuration, revealing hidden paths and secret chambers. The sanctuary had become a living puzzle, a world that changed and grew with every thought, every motion, every heartbeat. Her reflection in the mirror followed her, mimicking her movements with a radiant smile, as if encouraging her to explore further. She laughed softly, a sound that mingled with the gentle hum of the hair house and the rhythmic tap of rain outside. The tiny birds chirped in response, creating a delicate chorus that harmonized with the light and movement. She wandered across bridges of glowing hair, stepping carefully as strands flexed and twisted beneath her fingertips, leading her to hidden rooms filled with impossible details. Miniature gardens of luminescent flowers, glowing staircases that twisted upward into spiraling towers, and tiny glowing windows revealing glimpses of worlds that felt vast and infinite. Time became irrelevant as she explored, the sanctuary expanding in all directions, responding to her curiosity and imagination. She discovered a glowing archway that opened into a vast chamber filled with floating orbs of light, each one a tiny fragment of memory or dream. She reached out, touching one, and it pulsed with warmth, projecting a vision of herself playing, laughing, and creating without restraint. Her hair responded instantly, coiling and stretching to form new pathways that connected the chamber to towers, balconies, and hidden nooks, each illuminated with soft, radiant light. The rain outside grew softer, almost melodic, blending with the hum of her sanctuary and the whisper of her heartbeat. Tiny glowing creatures darted between strands, tracing arcs of light that lingered in the air, forming intricate constellations that seemed to tell stories only she could read. She moved across a bridge of strands, feeling the strands sway and pulse beneath her fingers, and realized that every touch, every thought, had transformed the hair house into a limitless world, a place where she could dream freely and shape reality with her own hands. She paused at a glowing balcony, looking down at the strands twisting below her, illuminated by floating lanterns and tiny glowing birds. Her reflection in the mirror reached out again, and for a fleeting moment, it stepped through, merging with her own presence. She laughed softly, her voice echoing with joy and wonder, realizing that the sanctuary was not merely a hiding place, it was a world reborn through imagination, a refuge where she could remember the art of dreaming. The glowing strands swayed gently as if in acknowledgement, a living symphony of light and magic, waiting for her next step, her next touch, her next thought. Every detail pulsed with life. Staircases curling impossibly, bridges spanning radiant gaps, glowing doors opening to reveal infinite possibilities. The hair house stretched beyond sight, towers reaching higher, balconies twisting into spirals, floating lanterns casting soft, dreamy glows over corridors that bent and shifted like liquid light. She wandered deeper, exploring new rooms that emerged from her imagination, discovering miniature creatures with wings of light, pools of glowing water that reflected endless stars, and tiny glowing plants that seemed to hum with their own secret melodies. Then, the rain began to whisper her name. Not in fear, not in anger, but in curiosity. And she listened. The hair strands around her twitched, quivering like leaves caught in a gentle breeze, glowing faintly as if aware of the name the rain had carried. A soft hum filled the room, resonating in the strands, and a faint glowing doorway appeared within the hair house, suspended midair, delicate yet unmistakably beckoning. It shimmered with threads of liquid light, edges curling and spiraling like a portal forged from her imagination. Her heartbeat quickened. Somewhere beyond her hair, beyond the rain, something waited. She approached slowly, each step along a glowing bridge of hair sending pulses of radiant light across the strands. Tiny glowing creatures flitted around her, circling in patterns that mirrored her growing anticipation, leaving trails of luminescent dust that lingered in the air. The sanctuary pulsed with life, stretching and curling to accommodate the doorway, forming bridges and towers that seemed to guide her forward. Her fingers brushed the glowing strands as she moved, and they twined around her hand like a living guide, urging her onward without words. The doorway shimmered, revealing glimpses of a world beyond faint landscapes that defied physics, floating islands of light suspended in mist, towers that spiraled impossibly upward, and creatures of radiant energy moving gracefully through the air. The rain outside tapped softly against the windows, each droplet sending a ripple of light across the hair strands, echoing the pulsing glow of the doorway. She stepped closer, and a faint wind stirred within the sanctuary, though no windows were open, carrying with it a scent of ozone and wet earth, tinged with something unfamiliar, a hint of adventure, a whisper of the unknown. Her fingers grazed the edge of the glowing portal, and the strands responded, curling and twisting to form a staircase of light leading directly into the doorway. Tiny glowing birds perched along the railing, their wings scattering sparks that floated like stars in the air. She felt a thrill of exhilaration mixed with trepidation. The world she had built within her hair had been her sanctuary, her control. But this doorway promised freedom beyond imagination, a place where the rules of her sanctuary might not apply, a place waiting to test her curiosity. Taking a deep breath, she stepped onto the glowing staircase. Light rippled beneath her feet, illuminating the strands that stretched out in every direction, curling into bridges, balconies, and towers that seemed to rearrange themselves with every motion. Tiny luminous creatures darted around her, exploring corridors and rooms she hadn't yet built, their soft hum blending with the whispers of the rain.